Adam?
Hey.
Are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm well, thanks. Well, you're in a new place.
Oh yeah, I'm in Hungary on a longer holiday/work session. So yeah, the weather is nice.
Very cool. Very cool.
Dylan might join. I see him online on the document.
It's amazing, man. It's good. Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
Doing good.
Hey.
How's it going with you?
All right. I'll just continue into the video. But I think we can start. Let's check in on goals for the week.
Yeah, I'm working on a merge request where we try to detect transactions and cross database modifications within the transactions. So if you have a transaction open, regardless of the database, and you make changes to, let's say, the issues table and the CI table, then we should be able to detect this and optionally raise an error. I'm also adding some utility functions to disable these checks so we can actually roll this out incrementally. I'm working on master for now, and yeah, I will try to also run it on the POC merge request and see how many offenses or errors we get.
I'll jump in with the next one. This week I am trying to merge a merge request I opened already to add extra log keys and Prometheus metrics for counts of queries against multiple databases, or basically including the database config name in the metrics. It got a little bit confusing because now we're looking to use the Prometheus labels to distinguish between different databases as opposed to the key of the metric itself. So this is kind of now making things a little bit divergent and confusing because log keys, there is no way to kind of like distinguish different log keys in JSON from each other than just using a different string key. But Prometheus has a slightly more sophisticated, you can have the same metric, but you can add labels, and this is a way to distinguish between different metrics within the same name. So now things are probably going to diverge a bit, and I was just working on that merge request, and it's now a bit fiddly.
Dylan, do you have somewhere like the MR for that? I'm just kind of curious, like how you
add the link
figure out the role, the database name, because like we're gonna be, I think, changing that slightly with your week changes.
Okay. You're changing the role with your exchanges? I'm not up to date on what that.
No, I mean like I'm just kind of curious like how your MR looks like, because like maybe what makes sense of merge things like how they are today, and like when we would like work on like, I don't know, getting rid of some of the methods would simply like fix that as well. So
yeah, I linked it there. My guess is, yeah, it's not necessarily going to have overlap with the multi-database support for load balancing stuff. The tricky thing is like we have legacy in log keys we use and Prometheus metrics names. So like I feel like we're kind of stuck in sticking to the same, using the same keys, same naming structure for log keys for all the database counts, and we're stuck with sticking with the same Prometheus metric names. And we're stuck because there's all these people build tooling around these things.
Yes, but like for the Prometheus, you probably need to add another label to distinguish the database connection, because like we already have a role, so probably we need, I don't know, name, spec, or whatever.
Well, this is the confusing thing. Role was used to generate the name of Prometheus metrics in the past, but they don't want to keep going down this road of generating more and more Prometheus metrics names, or at least that was kind of the feedback I got so far, was generating longer and longer Prometheus metric names by interpolating more strings into them, in which case would be the config name or the database name. They don't want to do that, so instead we'll use labels, which is actually a good use of Prometheus labels, but now all of a sudden we kind of have a divergence where, okay, we're using roles to generate names, but we're using config names to generate labels.
Can we emit like for like, I don't know, one milestone, and then kind of like kill the deprecated ones?
Well, I would have to involve a lot of people to go down that road, because that's all of the Grafana dashboards that relate to database stuff, and anybody that's doing any kind of using Prometheus for anything. So
okay, but like if you would keep a role and just add a label for database name like CI or main, would it actually like work?
Yeah, that's what I'm planning on doing, and that's the easiest option for now. But it's just the code starts to look pretty weird and hacky now. But anyway.
Yes, I think like, because like for the ARK, I mean, like we changed these key names like many times already. So I would be not so, I think, worried about like retaining the current key names. Maybe except like db_count, but maybe for the all other ones, we would kind of figure out like the better pattern for them, because like we are not super dependent on the ARK keys as far as now, except maybe like some Elastic Watcher that we have.
Right, the security watches that are on there. There's also links into, people build dashboards in Kibana, and there's links to those dashboards from Grafana dashboards for like quick debugging with more details. It is less problematic than the Grafana one, because the Prometheus metrics will be powering alerts and Grafana dashboards, and those are all like complex version control things, where things in Elasticsearch and Kibana probably are much less critical, but it's still a road to go down for me to change naming conventions there.
I know, that's the tricky part. Like, I know that we did that already a few times, so maybe it's not really that terrible thing to like reiterate on naming.
Yeah, I don't know. I can bring in more people. There'll be other people that have a stronger opinion on this than me, so I can find out if other people have where to go next if I want to continue pursuing that renaming an Elasticsearch path.
Next, I'm doing the schema search part. I'm validating for dev tests. Maybe fraud, maybe not fraud. That'll be my week.
So what the plan is to create, Tom, the plan is to create something that's merged, that just adds a schema search path to our connections that is just public. Is that the current plan?
I'll find the epic and link it. So the current plan is that we'll create a GitLab CI schema and GitLab shared and also public. And then we used to be implicit about whether you use public or not. So the idea is to be explicit about using public and also GitLab CI. And then we'll move the CI tables that we move to the new database to that schema as well. So the biggest and the first roadblock is in production to validate that we can actually use schemas in production. I think the current idea is that instead of using the database YAML schema search path, we'll alter database to set a search path instead.
I'm kind of curious, like why you need the like DCI database with schema search path? Like...
So that's my third point. So the search path, this is just further down the line, because if we hide the, so in the main database, we can either have public in GitLab CI or just public, right? Put aside shared. So, but if we hide public, it's useless to hide public without having a CI database. So that's why we need a CI database.
Okay, I still don't understand. Sorry.
You don't. So like, let's say we have a CI table, CI builds table, right? If we hide GitLab CI schema in the main database, the functionality is going to be broken. So we need the CI database. Yeah, that's why we need the CI database in CI.
I was thinking that maybe what we could do, like we could run as a regular migration, like create schema on just main database, and maybe add some dummy table for that to just validate that schema search path is properly set on the like some next connections that we will be opening.
Yes.
Because right now, like what your merge request does is like kind of requires us to actually the structure SQL. Okay, it's slightly different.
So I'm jumping ahead. Yes, I know what you meant. Yeah. This is pure to make sure
Sorry,
I lost you for test. Yeah. True for the issue that I'm looking at.
I lost you for a second, Tong. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Didn't hear anything.
My internet's died. Oh no. So yeah, so I'm doing that as well in a new merge request, or I haven't started that yet.
Okay, so like what you are doing like before is probably like testing search path, but this MR is to unify the structure SQL to equal, CI structure SQL to equal structure SQL, right?
Yes.
The MR that you link.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have small overlap. Then okay, I'm gonna comment later throughout the day, so we'll have like my feedback for tomorrow and like some MRs open that will, I think, slightly change, for example, how we deal with the before and the big cleaner stuff. So maybe we would merge these things out of mine before yours out of this draft MR.
Yeah. So that MR in number 2 is it has a lot of things to merge before. So if you can merge, if you got the before all and the single structure, that'd be great. Yeah.
You have the next agenda item too, Tom, if we're going through. Oh no,
Yes.
Camille's goals of the week is up next, yeah. Camille, we were going through the goals of the week agenda, and you're up next.
I kind of have more comments of mine before, like bottom, but I'm kind of like continue splitting my or like context switching between like Yorick changes and these CI structure changes. So actually last week I started creating a draft branch now locally for all of this before all and DB cleaner stuff to kind of make that in a form that could be merged, and it's like it's valid for like I think all the future stuff. And I also added marginalia comments. That's why my questions about the DB role, because I kind of see like the DB role will simply not work with the load balancer stuff of Yorick, because DB role right now fetches from a very particular load balancer configuration, which is load balancer.main or something like that, where you get DB role. So this design simply will not work with the CI, but this is something that we can change later. And while looking at that, I will also create issue how we could approach it differently, because actually this was kind of self-solve the DB role everywhere, because we in all places have access to the connection has access to the pool has access to the DB config, and each DB config has a name, which can actually be any arbitrary string. And today for the main database is a main, for the CI is a CI, but you can actually like at least raise 6.1 design, propose you to add underscore replica. So probably this would be my proposal for ensuring that if we create a connection pool out of the load balancer, this DB config name will include underscore replica appended to the main config name. So you would not have the DB role anymore, but you could really, if you want to retain the DB role, you could split the string and have like the main connection and like the role basically, or like specification and role in that form that you access like from connection pool DB config .name simply.
Yeah, I understand how you are now saying that work is all connected to what I'm doing, but I'm wondering, like my bias is to move further away from using string concatenated names to interpret meaning. And like one of the things you're saying there is we're going to have a config name called main underscore replica. And that is how we're going to know that it's the main database and that it's the replica by the fact that it's main underscore. And like we have structured meaning today in roles, and that is structured meaning is actually because we wrote the load balancer code and it understands what is a primary and a replica and like that. And then we're going to destructure that into string concatenation by doing what you're saying. So I could imagine.
Yes, but like the current design simply will not work, because the current design connection was, it's very connection based, and they actually right now it's doing like very heavy tracking of the connection. So that's the interesting part, because there are like this is one of the way. Another way you can really create a DB config with a replica set to true as a flag of the DB config, because this is like the internal behavior of that. But what I'm kind of saying today, that like today in the load balancer class, there is like a hash or like two hashes that we manually track whether the given connection, what is the purpose of that connection. And this simply will not work, because you would have to traverse all of the load balancer connections to find if your particular connection, I lost you for a second. If this particular connection is like the connection that, what is the purpose of that connection? So I'm kind of just thinking rather like that, the problem with the current design, that like we access like the global object to make that. And this global object to track an internal state. And this kind of becomes a pointer as well. So that's not really like a great thing to do.
we have limits in like we're using a bunch of Rails classes right now, like their connection objects and stuff, and we're like monkey patching things. But like I don't see conceptually why we can't have the connection know what its role was. Like why a connection should be able to know that it is a read-write connection or a primary or a replica, like whatever language you want to use. So like right now the code, it looks like it says DB role for connection here. I don't know, this might be something you're saying this goes through .main, but there's no reason that this code here can't just get a DB role from a payload connection in a way that doesn't use a static thing. So it doesn't use a .main or class methods. It could use instance methods on this to interpret the role of that connection. I don't know how I could go through and how it works now. I'm guessing you were saying it calls .main or something, but
yes, I think like the interface may be very similar to what you have now, but this information will be accessed differently. So I'm gonna probably open just MR for that. It's gonna be much easier like for you to see how it would change, but very likely I need to look like how Yorick changes things, but it's very likely that we may kind of retain a pattern that nothing changes. For example, in this method invocation, because just implementation of this method changes because it could be fetching data directly from the connection instead of like from the global hash tracking something that it's tied to the single load balancer. So
yeah, I think that's how the code will end up neater doing what you're describing anyway, and so that's how it should be implemented. And it was probably just faster to not implement it that way to begin with. But now we need to.
So I think my perception is like kind of make the minimal amount of the changes like to affect you, but we need to change away how these configuration and names are being accessed because the current design is like single database centric.
Yeah, I think a lot of that code changes you're talking about will live in GitLab database load balancing, which is what Yorick is working on as far as I understand. But yeah, I think probably these accesses from the logging and Prometheus stuff likely don't need to change that much. I don't think they really need to change their relationship to, instance variables or class methods very much from what I'm thinking. You're muted, Camille. We didn't get to hear what just happened.
No, it's pretty hot. It's 90 degrees when you take it right from the plate.
Okay, throw an egg on there and fry it up.
Actually, people did that, so you could actually probably like heat water easily as well. So there is like a lot of uses of like 3D printer.
Great. All right, I think we talked about that topic. Camille, you should ping me on a merge request if you have it, if you want to get more concrete about that specific topic. And it may well affect what I'm working on. It's going to take me a couple of days to get the design right of what I'm working on anyway. So, Tom, you're up next. The chain of merge requests.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight like a few things that we need. And I think that a lot of other MRs will need this as well. So I see that Camille is going to open MRs for two of that. Thank you. That will be really helpful. Yeah.
Yes, I was also wondering about like opening the one for the structure SQL, but I think like I just wonder like how to proceed with that because like if you started working on that as well, I can just kind of move on to something different. But if you, for example, want to solely focus on the schema, I can try to open MR for that, and we can kind of work on the MR together.
If you wanna, I can open the MR for either of them. It's pretty easy for me.
Yes, because I was also like looking at about the small change to the db/ci migrate, because we have this problem with the enums. But if you would not use a symlink but use db/migrate, we would not be loading the same file twice and overlying. So we would get rid of the enums. And I was actually like thinking about some change, like first like to the schema migrations, but also like to these paths, that if you would go in this like common structure and common migration paths, the better would be like to configure that to point to exactly the same directories simply. Because then like we don't have problem with enums. And I was actually thinking about pushing MR to validate that if we can actually, I don't know, provision another CI database, maybe disable that for now, but see, actually that's the tricky part, because we have the CI instance variables, so we could actually retain exactly the same structure, but run all the CI tests using this separate database with the CI instance variables. So technically this could be like a very easy way to check that some very small portion of the CI decomposed in another database is working on the tests. So I was actually thinking about trying that.
Yeah, I think we need before. So the before is the first thing that thinks immediately.
Yes, and like why before all like changing? Because I would also want to get rid of the overlay that is made for the geo and kind of discover all the connection classes to actually make changes on the connection classes, and the same for the DB cleaner. So kind of like, because right now, even also like the geo, they override before all because they don't, the before all is like kind of like not very well suited for many databases, but I think there is slightly better design that we can kind of support any number of the top level connection classes in the future. Anyway, I will open MR. I actually have that working locally, so I just need to open MR for that.
Okay, yeah.
It's very easy.
Pass,
it's very easy and non-intuitive change.
Mm-hmm. I think we just talked about what we already talked about on tree. Tree C. Do you want to talk about tree C?
Yes, Pat is working, but he's also pretty occupied with the PK stuff. And he discovered that like disabled joins, I only pick like 2 backports. So, but he discovered that there were like some problems with the polymorphic relations. So I'm kind of like wondering that this is probably one of the items that we would benefit from having merging quickly, because we could then like focus on fixing the no relations from the POC. But second, this would actually, I think, is prerequisite for this MR of the POC from the last week that you reviewed about discovering cross joins. I didn't work on this MR further because there is no point until we have like this in place, because right now there's like too many failures than actual failures after disabled joins, because disabled joins generate, the lack of the disabled joins generates a bunch of the failures today on this merge request of mine being open. And until we kind of mark these disabled joins, I don't know, even with the feature flag to indicate that they should be like these relations going through, they should be executed as separate queries. Like it's gonna be too much issues to create on this cross-join MR of mine. So
yeah, we could maybe whitelist has many through explicitly. Like maybe all has many through queries look exactly the same, and we can just go, okay, has many through queries don't trigger this exception, and therefore we don't need to use that. Or we could say has many through, we monkey patch it so that it disables the checker.
Yes, but there is a difference. Like you don't execute that on the caller. You are executing this as a callee, so you don't really know exactly if you use has many joins at the time of the execution. So you would have somehow like hack into the implementation to indicate that like how you access the data, because like from the query first, like this is like this check is like very far, very low. So it's not even RL, it's not even yet active record relation, but basically has many through converts this specification into a call on dot joins, basically. So you don't really know if it's valid join or not valid join, because it's already like through many layers of like transformation of the construct.
Yeah, I think it will be possible with some heavy monkey patching of has many through to like change what has many through does so that it whitelists itself. But that's probably not a good approach. And I agree with you then if we get disable joins done. And well, the thing I'm concerned about there is even if we fix the disable joins thing, we're still maybe 20 MRs away from having all the disable joins true.
That's the thing. And I think like there is a risk with the disabled joins and the performance. But we talked with the part, and I actually proposed that like, can we add a lambda syntax for the disabled join to actually make this disabled join behind the feature flag? So technically, feature flag on the production would evaluate to false, but on the development would evaluate to true.
So you're saying in the testing environment, it will evaluate to true in CI, so therefore it won't trigger any of the join detection. Yeah, that's fine. I guess I kind of am reluctant to say that disable joins is the solution to these problems by default. I actually saw several examples where we just removed has many through relationships already because they were never used. Has many through, it's optional. It's not like you're not expressing the structure of your database when you say has many through. People sometimes are adding them preemptively, going, oh, this is nice to describe how this thing is related to this other thing through another thing, but then they never call them methods.
That's okay. That's another tricky aspect, because like one of the things that I saw, and there's also the risk that like if you don't have has many relations, it's very likely that people will use the .where clause fairly often, and it's actually happening in some cases. So it's actually then the question is like, it's better to has too many has many that you are not using, or is it better to people then not add has many because they don't see them right away and they kind of fall back to using .where?
Well, I don't know, that sort of conceptually when you're reviewing code, you should be able to say whether you think using a scope with .where looks cleaner than a has many through, but the reviewer should be able to say, okay, that is actually a has many through that you could be writing there. But I don't know, I'm not convinced that keeping around has many throughs just to avoid people ever writing .where, because it doesn't actually work anyway, because people don't see all the has many throughs. Like when you look at an active record model with 40 has manys and 60 validations in it, you don't necessarily know that it actually contains what you need to get at. And so you just go ahead and write a scope with .where anyway, because that's how your brain thinks about how to access that data. Yeah, so I don't think having methods sitting around that are unused solves the problem of people writing code in a way that you think is not necessarily the clearest way to write that code. But Yeah. Anyway, I'm still concerned that if we add the disable joins thing, we can't actually solve all the disable joins right away. But maybe you're right with the feature flag. We just solve them all by default, and then we just don't turn on the feature flags.
I mean, like we still need to enable like the feature flag at some point, but there is like the potential risk associated with the performance, so we need to actually validate it. So probably we need to turn on feature flag by feature flag
Yeah. Well,
to ensure it actually doesn't harm performance later.
Yeah. What I feel a little bit uncomfortable saying that we would have feature flags in the code that we have not even confirmed are probably a safe feature flag. Like merging a feature flag to the code for a join query that if we just looked at it and went, oh, there's absolutely no way that's going to be performant based on the usage. It's the usage is doing a sort, and now that sort has to happen in memory, and it's going to load 1 million records as opposed to 20. If we don't evaluate each one of those things individually, I feel uncomfortable merging a feature flag that has that hidden behind it, because there is no code review process for enabling the feature flag. We've just got that you're saying, okay, it's up to the developer to test if it's performant, but they're not having the time of a database reviewer going, okay, let's look at the specific queries and usages to figure out if this is, you want those things to be vetted at a thorough level.
That's valid point, and I think we could probably identify as soon as we add this disabled joins separate MR, what the cardinality of the data set we expect on that. And if we expect like very big like amount of the entries on this relation, this is probably something that should trigger an issue like the change. But at least I don't remember all cases, but like the cases with the runner namespaces, this one is for example like only one. A case with the runner projects, this case is probably something to validate it, but probably up to 100 of the projects that you manually assign. So I think as soon as we have MR, it's gonna be much easier like to see it and like discuss like if this is valid, if this is valid disable join or not valid disable join.
Yeah, but that MR doing all of them in one go seems like a bit much for us to go through. Is this valid? That's why I kind of like the idea of saying we push those all off to the relevant teams for them to justify that their has many through is valid and safe, or they have to write their queries differently and denormalize and remodel their data. Like that's the same way we've been doing with the join queries. And many of them will come back with, okay, yeah, I've validated, here's why I think this has many through is safe, and then we can merge that.
Okay, but so that's actually like very valid idea. So how about like we actually ship feature disabled joins, but make the respective teams to decide if this disabled join is valid and whether or if they should be rolling out the feature flag.
Yeah, so some teams have already started doing that. I mean, somebody from Secure was already showing me merge requests with disabled joins because he branched off of the other disabled joins thing. And then we looked at it and they were unused, so we removed them. So we're already making progress on that. But yeah, I agree with you. That's a good way to go.
Yes, but like if the disabled join is unused, I mean, if the through is unused, the POC will gonna trigger error when it's used. It's not gonna trigger error where it's unused.
Okay, well, maybe they were finding things that you didn't find in the POC, but okay, and you're also saying that the test suites, yeah, okay, so I mean, unused is, okay, maybe unused is a distraction from this conversation then, and I won't bring that up, but yeah, I think it's the good way to go to distribute disable joins to the team as another solution for solving their join queries. But we're now just talking about how do we get to the point where people are presented with all of their join queries to solve. We had the SQL parsing thing that you've implemented. You say that it's not a good idea to do that before we have disable joins implemented. And I'm still unsure if that disable joins really it feels like it's too many steps. We're still waiting to get that SQL parser out to people. I want to get that out as soon as possible.
Yes, I'm because like this simple PG query MR currently has 4,000 tests being read. It's significantly more than I think I would anticipate. Even like testing things locally, I saw like a lot of these failures is simply because of the lack of the disabled joins, because of the use of the through. This is my thinking why we need like to get disabled joins, because these are the things that we already know to cause the problems. And now, like, if you would have to add I don't know, skip for every through usage, we can do it, but like it's pretty nasty as well.
I actually think it would be good if we. I think it would be good if we did, because that still aligns with the same goal we just talked about. If somebody has to address the has many throughs, and they have to do them one at a time systematically and go, is this a safe has many through disable joins? And because it's thousands of tests doesn't necessarily mean it's thousands of lines of has many throughs. We really shouldn't have that many has many throughs that are going back and forth between CI, I would have thought. But we would know that from the POC, because we added all the disabled joins to that, so I'm not sure how many we added.
Yes, but like for the POC, the approach I took with the POC, I wrote a script that goes through all relations and ensure that disabled joins is configured appropriately for all ones that would simply need them. So like the POC actually can be defining more disabled joins than actually is needed today by the code, because some of this through may be not used as you kind of said, but POC is ensuring that this specification is simply correct from the functional point of view. So if you use this thing, it will simply work because it understands that this data is here, this data is here, so this relation needs to have configured disabled joins. And like, for example, like I actually find initially disabled joins flag to be not so straightforward to declare where it should be used. That's why I kind of like tested that on many levels and wrote a script to kind of traverse all the relationships to ensure that it's actually created. I mean, that it already hints the disabled joins only in the cases when it's truly needed by the location of the data, or like location of the cross join, because this is also like where it makes difference on the sometimes asymmetric access of this data. So if you are interested, you can look at the POC, exactly how it evaluates condition where like disabled joins needs to be added to the given relationship as well.
Okay, I just checked the POC. We have 40 disabled joins. What if we had a syntax like, what's this? Oh, no, I was trying to copy from this thing. Has many through disabled joins, allow cross joins, and then the issue URL. And we monkey patched whatever is has many through, how has many through is doing that join query that you described, so that it actually executes the allow cross joins whitelist method. Is that likely incredibly difficult? Because then we could get it done with 40 more URL things.
I think it's like adding extra work. I think like you can achieve exactly the same with the Lambda and disable joins and feature flag. If you want to ensure like that things are continuing working locally, I think feature flag can accept probably something like I don't know, extra parameter with the URL or whatever, or like feature flag already has URL.
Well, yeah, okay, but we can't allow people to turn on feature flags that are going to out of memory our application. So we can't merge. Sorry, my syntax was probably wrong. We can't add disabled joins true or even feature.enabled until we validated the queries are sensible. It's a whole different thing to allow feature flag control of code that is definitely not going to work and hasn't been validated at all.
Yes, but like until you enable a feature flag, it's not going to be enabled, right?
Yeah, but where is the review process in enabling a feature flag? We now need to invent a process for communicating. The engineer communicates with a database reviewer, validates, approves, and allows them to enable a feature flag after that. We've lost that communication channel if we just stick feature flags around all of this code.
Yes, but I think there is like a challenge. Like we need to figure out a process that works for the majority of them, because as you said, there's a 40 of them. We think it's basically like too much effort to go one by one on them. So we need to figure out a way to do it in much more efficient form, to not spend now 4 months on actually getting this. So there is a valid question about the process. So the question is like how we do it like automatically, or like how we validate it, or how we enable that in the bulk, how we validate the performance of that, what metrics we look at that. Because like now, like if we create another 40 issues, we'll simply not be able to do it.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be 40 issues though. A lot of them will be grouped, but yeah, I mean, grouped in merge requests and whatever else. I mean, my preference would be distribute and allow the teams to group solutions as they please. 40 is not huge when we distribute it to 8 other teams, and they can look at the ones that all relate to them and group them if they're equivalent and have the review process.
So like, if I jump in here, what's the issue is that enabling a feature, asking each group to enable a feature flag is problematic because there's no MR?
Yeah, basically Camille's proposal is we stick, we use disabled joins everywhere, but behind a feature flag. So we just add 40 feature flags to the code, and then we say, okay, you now have disabled joins, and they're all enabled by default in CI, but disabled by default in production because they're a feature flag.
Yep.
Therefore, we just move on from all these joins.
Yep.
But my concern is, what does the next step look like when we believe there's a very good chance that several of those should not be ever turned on. The code should actually be removed, and they should rewrite the queries.
Logically, it's the same thing. If the engineer themselves add disabled joins, they will still need to go through a feature flag, right?
Yeah, but there will be code review if the engineer themselves adds it for one thing. But if we add it for all 40 and don't look at our own code to figure out if they're sensible, then we have feature flags shipped to production that potentially have seriously bad performance. That like the performance might be so bad that you're loading like 1 million CI jobs for a project when you are planning on sorting those CI jobs by something else. Like that is the kind of.
Yes, but there is another aspect. Like for example, on one of the issues recently, I got asked about like this pipeline spider, how I can actually self-validate that this is the problem. So I think like there is a strong need for us to having a cross-join discovery, and it's also beneficial for the disabled joins and every other work happening. Because people will simply ask, I want to see a failed test for me to actually understand what I am fixing. So this will generate a failed test if you enable that, and like we have some kind of control. And I kind of fully agree like with you, Dylan, about like there is a tricky part like how we could roll out that. I'm kind of wondering like how we can actually enable cross-join discovery soon for people to actually take leverage of that. Because if we add cross-join discovery is also gonna discover like all of these disabled joins being in used and have to be fixed. So the question is like, there is gonna be a plenty of the issues. So like how we do it like in the bulk for not make us do it one by one. Simply that's really like my concern. And like for me, like feature enabled, even maybe if we mark, even if we, I don't know, stop a feature enabled and look at this very particular feature flag name to I don't know, inject into PG query or anything that will simply work. I will be happy with that. Maybe it's not feature enabled, but maybe kind of following the idea of the allow cross joins call execution that returns true. But it's actually probably also tricky thing to do. But maybe this is how we approach that. But the question is like how we find disabled joins that are simply okay to be set to true and ones that are simply unlikely to be true that have to be reworked, because there is like this, I think there's a plenty of them that we need to fix. And in probably 90% of the cases, it's probably fine to set them to true because of the quantity. So how we can like make a decision quickly and move on top of that. So I think the feature flag, probably like we can work around it by reworking this PG query. If we have disabled joins with Lambda, like this, we could simply like use this syntax. It's gonna be probably lazily evaluated as part of the execution. So it would toggle a flag on the PG query analyzer for this. But then we are still left with the problem of the faulty issues and how we fix all of these disabled joins to not spend a few months on that. So we would probably solve a problem of the cross joins, but we still have the problem of the disabled joins. There is probably in majority of the cases is just fine to set to true.
Yeah. So, but that's well, okay. Then I agree with everything you said. What I feel like if we're already monkey patching into the has many through stuff, we can add the issue URL syntax I talked about. Rather than disable joins true, you don't actually allow people to disable joins without code review. We just have allow cross joins inline on all of the has many throughs. They have to have the issue URL, and that is, we tackle that in the same way all cross joins are tackled in GitLab as an issue assigned to a team. They evaluate and consider the performance options, and one option is to just disable joins.
I know, but yes, I understand that. The question is like, do we want to spend time on adding extra syntax? No.
I don't know. Based on all the ideas that we've just discussed, I haven't heard a simpler one. Well, I don't know. I mean, simpler is the wrong word for sure, but I haven't heard an option that gets us to the endpoint quicker. Feature flags, I don't think get us to the endpoint quicker.
For example, like we can do something like that today. If we have Lambda syntax on the disabled joins.
Yeah, okay. I'm fine with that. It's lazily evaluated, and it would be semicolon false or something, I think, like rather than checking a feature flag.
I don't know, like whatever, like it can be even like another method for this particular case. I don't know, but like this, for example, just because we have Lambda, it can be written like that. It can be all of cross joins, but also can be feature enabled like that, yeah. Right? So whatever is there is really like secondary.
Feature enable should be reviewed, but allow cross joins doesn't need review. We can merge that because it returns false. Then I'm okay with that proposal. That makes sense.
Then we still have the problem with all of these disabled joins, and like we need to kind of figure out a way to fix them quickly.
Yeah, well, let's get all 40 of them classified like that, and then like passing, and then we'll go ahead and create issues for them in batches. I'm happy to go through 40 things and go, this belongs to this team or this team, and just create quick issues and label them. And and they'll just go into the same bucket of issues that we already have for teams to solve. You have a join query, solve it. And we add disable joins as a candidate solution to your problem by recognizing the caveats. Oh,
yes,
also,
but I'm still worried by time it takes simply like to do it, because like you are still talking about like, I don't know, let's say maybe not 40. There are gonna be like 20 MRs adding disabled joins that has to go through all of the reviews and go through all the rollout process, and it's gonna take a lot of time simply. So I think we need to figure out a way to make it like more robust. Seems like in a lot of the cases, this is gonna be probably the only reasonable solution. So the question is like, how we can identify that this is like the only reasonable solution and focus only on the ones that this is not the solution.
Okay, there were 40 disable joins in there. A lot of them are has one. Has one, we don't need to evaluate. We can just swap it. Has one is safe. Like, has one through will only ever load one thing. So all of the has ones removed from that number 40, we're probably getting down to a pretty small number. They might be half has ones if I'm just at a glance. I don't know. Maybe 10 has ones in there or something.
So maybe like my proposal for that, because like first one is probably ones that we can actually disable joins right now to set it true.
Yep.
And we have the first menu, and for the first menu, we probably can write a query that's gonna find like what is like the biggest amount of the entries returned by the disabled joins, and we can probably run this query on top of the production, and see if this is if we are kind of going over the boundary of like 30 returns. This is something that triggers like to rethink the solution.
Yeah, that, based on my understanding of has running through, I don't understand how you can look at a has many and say this is going to return 30 records unless the join table only has 30 rows in it. But any table that has more than 30 rows has the possibility of returning more than 30 records. It depends on how they use that has many.
So I'm gonna think if there's like some way like to generate these queries like to execute, because maybe if we can identify the cases that like because of the access pattern, we simply just don't have a possibility of like accessing that many rows. We just said disable join set it true. So we could actually focus our attention on the ones that are really like problematic.
Okay, I contest you're going to go down the same path of it takes a bit of extra work to build such tooling that would have been the same as the tooling we build to just farm out 30 issue URLs based on the thing we just talked about. But I don't know.
To be honest, my solution for that problem would be I would enable feature flag and roll out the feature flag as soon as I see anything being broken and just keep it running. And just would continue adding more feature flags by general understanding of like how big expected quantity of the entries you kind of expect. And this is like how to validate that, but really like raise the awareness that this is like the aspect that we are changing. And this is probably like, because like, except probably like maybe 2 cases, I don't think that these disabled joins require very extensive validation. One thing that I would be worried about is like amount of the projects assigned to the runner. This would be something that I'm kind of super worried about. But as for the others, these disabled joins, they doesn't seem like to be particularly tricky. But I may be wrong. I didn't look more extensively into that. I was thinking that we basically look at that as soon as we start merging that. But I'm happy like with whatever solution we came up, as long as we kind of focus on what does matter, not like finding out each individual one. So I'm happy of the like at least one suggestion with the first one, because this seems like pretty straightforward. That reduces the amount of the future work that we have to do.
Yeah, I will just say the has many through performance problem is actually more subtle than it looks sometimes. Like it's not obvious that it depends on how people use a sort and limit query at the end of their code. Like I just see has many pipelines, but goes through something else. That something else, if they were trying to find the limit and find the latest pipeline or something like that, you're really in trouble, because the through query is now loading millions of pipeline joins that aren't needed.
I'm less worried about the disabled joins impact right now. I'm more worried about disabled joins impact in the future once we start kind of leveraging that. This is gonna be tricky thing to figure out, because this is potentially something that can cause like the subtool performance issues in the future, because now I know that like we're gonna be in particular looking at the performance aspect of things that we are changing. But as soon as this stabilize, we're gonna stop looking as we and other people will start using that, or like we keep adding new relations using that. So then there is like the tricky of the maintainability of the approach.
Yeah, that's why I would say disabled joins is almost like an anti-pattern. Like if you were doing code review and you saw somebody doing a join query in memory in Ruby, they were loading from one table and then joining it against another table in memory and then applying limits. This is part of our interview. One of the things we do in our interview is like, if you saw that code, you should say, no, that's not a good idea to do code that loads everything from the database and then sorts and limits it in memory. So that's what disabled joins does. We probably should see it as a red herring in code review that's only justified by, yeah, but in this case, we know it's okay. All right, I'm going to have dinner. This is a great conversation. I don't know what's going to happen next year, but anyway, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.